Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Realm. I'm Travis Bruce, and today we're doing another Women of Horror Spotlight. Today I have with us, she's an author, and she has out right now a book that's called Sorrow's Point, The Market Chronicles. I have with us today Danielle DeVore. Danielle, welcome to the Horror Realm.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure having you on. Now, tell us a little bit about Sorrow's Point.
Sorrow's Point actually began as... Oh my gosh. I really apologize. We're having a new HVAC system installed, and it's underneath the floor. So there's a little sound effect. Yeah. Sorrow's Point actually began as a conversation between my cousin and I. We're both confirmed horror film fanatics. And at the time, we were both lamenting about there weren't a whole lot of like really good horror films in the theaters. It was roughly 2010. And I came up with this thing, like, just off the fly, where I was like, okay, all you need to have a really good horror story is to have, an old creepy house. And say a man lives there that, is a rich guy, and he's involved in black magic and all this stuff. And, he decides to take that to a whole other level and starts doing human sacrifices and things. So there's this cop who's been reported there's screams coming from the house, and he comes up and he peers through the back window, and there's the rich guy gnawing on a child's leg. And my cousin was just like, Jesus Christ, Danny, that's wicked. You really need to write that. So that was what the beginning of Sorrow's Point was. And so that year, for NaNoWriMo, that's Sorrow's Point was my project.
Now, how long from the concept to actually, getting it out published, how long did that process take?
It took me roughly, because, since it was a nano project, I did complete it. And then I was finished with the book completely, like, filling out everything, because obviously 50,000 words wasn't really enough at the time for a full-fledged novel. So I fleshed it out, and then I started submitting to publishers, and it was signed on by a publisher that's now defunct. And then it was published for 2 years by that publisher. That publisher went under. And then some really great friends of mine decided to start their own publishing company, which one of them is Tina Moss, and the other lady is Yelena Casale. And they started City Owl Press. And when they were starting up the press, I'm like, well, hey, I just got the rights back for Sorrow's Point. Would you all be interested in Sorrow's Point? Because I have sequels. And they were like, oh, yes, this is awesome, please. And so that started the ball rolling, and the Market Chronicles have been published with City Owl Press since 2015.
Now, is it hard as an author to write a story knowing that there's going to be sequels?
Yes and no. It kind of depends on what it is. With the Sorrow's Point, the whole premise is that I have this main character, Jimmy Holiday. He's a defrocked priest, and he ends up investigating his friends, like, living in this house that has this horrible, jaded history, because his daughter starts emitting these signs that she's possessed. And Jimmy doesn't believe it because, this is the modern age. There has to be some sort of medical cause for this. And,
yes.
He's not a priest himself anymore. So he's like, I don't really think so. So when he gets there, he starts actually experiencing the things, and he realizes, oh, crap, this kid is actually fucking possessed. And but he also ends up being marked by a figure that is called God, but we don't necessarily know if it's God or not. And what I mean by mark is he's given a symbol on his wrist that means that he can emit this specific power that when he speaks, he can actually separate a soul from a body and, like, hold it in stasis, in safekeeping, before the soul can move on to wherever God or the devil decides the soul is going to go. And Jimmy also is kind of guided by his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Tabby, who is a witch. So they kind of act throughout the series kind of like supernatural private investigators, and they end up, like, working on a variety of different cases. Some of them are involving possession and exorcism. One of them has a devil baby. There's just all different things that happen through the course of the series that, is kind of like, you remember Kolchak the Night Stalker?
Yes.
Kind of like that. So every book, like, there's a new, like, weird, creepy thing that happens. So thus, Jimmy has to figure out, okay, what do I have to do with the thing? How do I fight the thing? And how do I come to some sort of resolution so we can get on with our lives type of thing.
Now, as a writer, with each story, do you evolve your characters for the audience?
Yeah. So, they all go through, like, I like to torture my characters. I'm really bad about that. So they go through a lot of emotional upheaval and everything. So Jimmy is much more mature now than what he was in the first book, because he's been through all these different things, realized the world is definitely not what he thought it was. And so he and Tabby, who at the end of book 4 was his fiance, but then, like, in book 4 something happens that, like, puts a big monkey in the whole wrench, and so book 5 that's coming out in May, they have to fight through that as well as the supernatural things.
Because, I mean, as a reader, one of the things that, when it comes to series, that I dislike is, when the character doesn't evolve or mature or change. Because, 5 years pass by, how can this person be the same person? I'm not the same person that I was 5 years ago.
Exactly.
So I love when an author starts maturing the character and you start seeing them grow or mature or even go for the worse over time.
I think one thing that makes horror a really fun genre to write is that in order for horror to be really effective, it has to be realistic. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about characters, a character always has an arc through the individual story of each book, but then when you have a series, they have an overreaching arc through the entire series. So you have to make the arc believable. If somebody's gone through a major trauma, they're not going to be the same that they were when the whole event started.
Exactly.
And the trauma is going to present its own problems because the character is going to be dealing, possibly with PTSD, all these other things that is, part of going through a trauma. So, outside of, just the horror event itself, you also have the horror of life and how to survive emotionally through all these situations.
I agree. And I mean, and that's something, when it comes to character development, which is so important. Horror, and not even in writing, but also in movies, character development is so important. I mean, as audience, we've gotten past that 80s, slasher, quick, fast, bing, bam, boom, where every character is kind of like, just expendable. So we kind of need to be invested in the character, because that's what makes it scary, when you feel something about the character, whatever they're going through, whether it be getting killed or so forth.
Exactly. And when you can see reflections of yourself in a character, so then it's like you're going through the event with the character.
I agree. Now, is it hard for you as an author not to put a little bit of yourself in your characters?
Well, I'll be honest, myself is pretty much in every character. I kind of exist with a little bit of a smart-ass attitude at times and stuff, and sometimes my horror is definitely tinged with humor because all of my characters have smart-ass moments, and so the comedy kind of gives you like light moments in the middle of the horror, but when you look at real life, nothing is ever just constantly horrific. You're going to have these funny moments, like, you're running through a house and somebody will possibly accidentally step on something and smacks them in the face, like old slapstick comedy, but that can happen. That's an honest-to-God thing that can happen. So, to me, I think that too many people get bound up in wanting to make horror serious all the time and everything, when life isn't always serious.
And sometimes some of the funniest moments in life are when horrible things are happening.
Exactly.
Now, so when you were creating the first story, and you knew that this was going to be multiple editions or a series, did you already have in mind a wraparound ending that was going to close the whole entire series out?
No, I'm actually what they call a pantser. So, like, I write everything flying by the seat of my pants. So it's kind of like when I start a Jimmy book, I'm like, okay, I know that, like, for instance, for book 5, Jimmy has to go to hell to save Tabby. So then it's like, okay, I don't know how the book's going to end yet, but I know I have to figure out how to get Jimmy to hell. So then I go through this whole process, how in the hell I'm going to get him to hell, what people he has to meet along the way to help him get to hell, because that's not something that a regular person knows how to do. It's not like you can just transverse to a whole realm of existence, let alone finding people that actually believe enough to get you there. Mm-hmm. And then, once he's there, what's it like? Because I didn't want to do like the whole cliche thing and like have, red walls and all that stuff. And so I created my own version of hell. So I kind of write myself into corners, then I have to write myself out of them. If that makes any odd sense.
But it sounds stressful, Danielle. Is it?
Not really, because I don't really know how to write any other way. I tried writing a paranormal romance quite a few years ago because everybody was talking in my writer's circle about like doing outlines and everything and having all the big points of the story written out beforehand. And so I made this outline and stuff and wrote directly to the outline. And what did I end up with? A book that was 15,000 words.
Wow.
So from that, I learned I cannot write that way. Writing by outline and having the whole story figured out is just not my thing.
But do you think as a writer, it's the rush or the stress or the pressure that is what motivates you?
No, for me, it's just kind of like, it's kind of interesting. I've had multiple types of writing in my life that I've done. When I was younger, I wanted to write music, so I wrote music for a while. And then I got involved in getting a theater degree because originally I wanted to do special effects makeup for horror films. And when I was doing my theater degree, one of the things that we had to do is, of course, choose different electives, and one of them I chose was playwriting. So then I got into writing plays, and then thus wrote some screenplays. And then from there, it was like I finally had the very first story idea that I had that I felt was big enough to make into a book. And I was down at the flu this one time, and people for years have been telling me I really needed to write a novel. And in this like thought in my head, my first book was about a teenage vampire. And it was like a street kid who gets turned into a vampire only to discover that he's the long lost vampire king. And so I'm sitting in the bathtub trying to cool off from this fever, and the water's running out the tap, and I'm like, you've been on the streets too long when the sound of an old man pissing in an alley sounds like falling rain. And that was the first line of the book. I'm like, oh my God, I've got it.
I love that line.
Thank you.
Now, when it comes to being a writer, listen, especially indie horror right now. I mean, it must be tough because it's easy now to get your work out there, but it must be tough because there's so many projects that come out. There's so many books out there right now. So what are some things, for a new writer out there who's watching, what are some things that you have done to kind of help yourself kind of stand out and find your niche audience?
The biggest thing is that, one, I really always try to be kind to my other authors and readers because, ultimately you need to find your friends in this business because there are so many people writing books these days that it is hard to stand out. So once you kind of gang together with a group of really good friends, then I'm not saying that you'll share fan bases, but if you have one group in a friend group that's like, hey, my buddy has this new book coming out. It's really similar to this book that I wrote in terms of like subject matter. I think you might want to check it out. You may end up getting some cross-pollinated fans here and there. And so you kind of have to build your network over time. The way I look of being a writer is that it's a marathon. It's not a race. Mm-hmm. So for every year you're in it, then you chip away at the big rocks that everybody has in front of them so that you can get through the path. So little by little, you have to do your networking. You have to, reach out to readers in whatever way you can. You find out where your audience base is. And one of the biggest tools that I've found is that there's a Facebook group on Facebook called Books of Horror. and it has numerous readers in there that are just rabid horror fans. And so I spend a lot of time in there talking about books that I've read and enjoyed, talking with other people that have read books that I've enjoyed, and just making connections with people so that when I do have a book that comes out, people and hopefully will check it out. But at the base of it, I've at least made myself known to a network of rabid horror readers. And so, unlike, like romance readers have a really easy time of finding traction on TikTok,
mm-hmm.
horror readers, this one niche group, has evolved into, I think they're up to 60,000 people now.
Wow.
So that's a huge group of people that love horror. So as a horror author, that's a very important group to get involved in and be active and, support other authors and everything like that. Because if, it's just an amazing resource, not just for business, but also being part of the horror family as a whole.
I agree. I need to join that group too.
Yes, you do.
Yes. Because, one thing I agree with you, like someone, like, I've been doing my YouTube channel for a year and a half. Listen, there's a billion different horror channels out there on YouTube, right? A billion. And like, I'm not trying to compete with the Dead Meats or the Bloody Disgustings. I'm not trying to compete with them. You know what I mean?
No.
But there's a lot of small horror YouTube channels, and I am never ever afraid on having. If you have a YouTube channel, you have a horror YouTube channel, come on my show. I'll interview you and promote your stuff, and we collab. I'll come on your show. But like, and people question me about like, why'd you do that? Well, why do you try to collab with your competition? I'm like, I don't see them as competition because they have a fan base that I don't have, and I have a fan base that they don't have. Who knows? Some of their fans might like my stuff.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, that's how you do it.
Exactly. And, unlike, big publishers that have, multi-million-dollar budgets to like, put books in bookstores on end caps and all these other things, as an indie horror person, I'll put it that way because, there's definitely, creators, because there's filmmakers, there's writers, there's editors, there's YouTubers. The horror community, when you're in an indie space, then you have to do your marketing a totally different way than the big guns do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you like throw a whole bunch of money of just ads, that isn't going to get you anywhere, because most people don't click on an ad unless they've heard about like whether an author's good or whether there's something about the thing that they're seeing that gets them interested right off the bat. But there's so many like people that have like good cover artists now and things like that. It's really hard to stand out. So how you start chipping away is getting that network going. And then, still everything is still, way back when, going by word of mouth.
I agree. Now for most people, I had a woman author on recently, and I brought this up because, I follow the indie horror author community pretty well, and so people who don't, there's a lot of weird toxic shit that's going on.
Yeah.
and I don't know where that's coming from, because like you say, when it comes to small but indie horror creators, we're such a small niche. So everything's already against us already. You know what I mean? Because we're competing against the big boys or the big girls. And I don't know why there's so much fighting amongst each other.
The only thing I have to say about it, it's like my dad said, it's kind of like the 4% always messes it up. Most of the time, like, people want to talk about the thing that's going to get the most attention. So when there's some sort of travesty that goes on, or you have like a publisher that turns bad, that doesn't pay the authors, or you have somebody in the horror space that turns out to be a real creep and is doing all these horrible things behind the scenes, that stuff spreads like wildfire because it's the sensational story. Whereas, people don't tend to talk about, hey, this person raised this amount of money for, a animal shelter in their local town, and they did it by way of selling horror books or something. People don't talk about that. They talk about the sensational. And, it's just kind of like, that 4% thrives on the drama.
I agree. And unfortunately, what it does is brings a bad reputation to everyone else in the community.
Exactly.
All right. So Danielle, as you know, this is Horror Channel. I don't know if you watch my show enough to know what I'm about to do. I'm gonna ask you 3 random horror questions. These are your personal opinion.
Okay.
And since you're a horror fan, I think you're gonna do just well. All right. What horror movie series do you wish they would stop making movies?
Alien.
Why
In my
Alien?
opinion, the first 2 movies were the best that they could get. And while I am kind of like an outlier in that I actually liked Prometheus, the subsequent films were just not great. And they should never have made Alien 3. That was just bad. So, it's just stop. Just let us have our xenomorph, our amazing, wonderful xenomorph, and put him back in the theaters.
And I did not like the Alien versus Predator collab movies. Those were horrible.
Yes,
but I'm looking forward to this new one. What's it called? Alien
Romulus.
Romulus.
The trailer looks interesting, but I tend to withhold my feelings until I actually see a movie because I have been burnt so bad on the trailer, either showing the best parts of a movie or the trailer actually shows stuff that doesn't even end up in the movie finally. Yes. So I just kind of withhold my judgment until I get to see the final result.
I totally agree. First person to say Alien. Okay, interesting. All right. Second one is, what horror movie, could be a movie series, do you feel like people will say, oh my God, it's the greatest thing ever, and you're like, it's okay?
Hereditary. I am not a fan of Hereditary at all. The biggest thing that stands out to me is, again, like we've talked before, is the reality and the basis in horror. And for me, knowing a bit about, law enforcement and stuff, because I have had family members who are involved in the military, and one family member was involved with the MPs for a while and stuff. There's no way in anywhere in the United States, even a small town, if a child was killed by having their head knocked off by a telephone pole, would it not be investigated? And plus, since the brother was under the influence when it occurred, he would be charged with something. And so that blew the entire movie out of the water to me. I can't stand to watch it. I think it's silly. And then the whole, cult thing, okay, yes, there's, dots here and there of, the cult throughout the movie and things like that. But to me, for a cult movie to be effective, you kind of have to know how the cult works and, what the rituals mean and things like that. So I'm just not a fan of Hereditary. I don't understand the hype. Just not for me.
Because there's 2 groups. There's Hereditary fans and Midsommar fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Midsommar fan.
I am too. I like Midsommar quite a bit. There's a few little issues with it that I have, but they're minor enough that I don't really care that much. So, I really actually enjoy Midsommar. I just am not a Hereditary fan at all.
Way better than Hereditary. And Hereditary is beautifully shot, the environment, so far, the atmosphere.
And the actors did an amazing job.
It's a movie that I struggled to finish the first time, and I would never revisit again.
No. I agree 100%.
It's a tough first watch. I mean, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
All right, second question. I'm trying to give you a tough one this time. Let me see what I'm doing. What is the last horror movie that you paid money to go to the theater to, and you walked out and you were like, fuck, I just wasted $14?
That's an easy one. Long Legs. I felt like I had just watched a shit sandwich.
Everybody says that they love Long Legs.
I know, but the thing is that you have this, and spoiler time here, you have this wonderful, beginning of, kind of serial killer thriller type thing, Silence of the Lambs, etc., and you have a main character who's an FBI agent that acts a little bit like she has some type of disorder on the autism spectrum, which totally fine. I was totally down with it. But then suddenly you have little things that pop up that are problematic. There's no evidence of her being like a savant with like symbolism and numbers, and she solves the code of the serial killer in roughly 2.4 seconds. Then suddenly there's this introduction of these dolls, and the dolls like have a weird orb in their head that somehow contains a black smoke that is supposed to be the essence / soul of the person that they're supposed to be targeting or something, but there's no explanation as to how the crap gets in the orb. And then all of a sudden, last third of the movie, oh my god, Longlegs is a beacon for Satan! And there's no explanation. It's just, Satan!
You know what, Danielle? I'm going to say something. It's going to piss off a lot of my indie horror fans. I apologize, guys. I love you guys. I love what you're doing. I don't trust their recommendation in movies. I really don't. Indie horror fans do not know what a good horror movie is. I'm being dead here. And I don't know if it's because they're afraid to bash other creators or say that it's a bad movie.
And the thing about it is that I'm also a person that absolutely loves like schlock horror films. I love like the total cheese and everything. One of my favorite movies to watch, like as a comfort horror movie, is Vampire Trailer Park. I don't know if you've ever gotten to see that, Jen.
I have not seen that.
It's about a bulimic vampire, and it was only ever aired in the U.S. on public access in Florida, and then it only actually had an official release on VHS in Ireland. So it's like a rare one, but you can find it on YouTube. It's completely ridiculous. But that's a knowingly, like the people put heart in it. It's hilarious, it's cheesy, and it's fun. But when you have, like a big studio putting in a crap ton of money into something, and, at the very least, the writing should be plotted solidly throughout. And when you have plot holes, I have a problem. Or when you do like the cliche, like Game of Thrones things, well, we have no way to continue on the story, so let's throw in a rape. I don't like rape used as a plot device. It's traumatic for a large group of people. 2, it's a simple out. And as a writer, you should be better than that.
This is what I think. All right. So Longlegs is considered an indie horror film, right? People don't got a big budget release. I should say indie horror fans do not say, they say that every indie horror movie is great. And like, they say the same thing about Terrifier, they say the same thing about Winnie the Pooh, they say the same thing about what was the other indie horror movie? A Violent Nature, or whatever the fuck it was called. They all say that those movies are great, right? And I think they say that they're great because they are indie horror filmmakers, right? But then you hear the actual horror fans say, "Oh my goodness, A Violent Nature was horrible. Longlegs was horrible." I'm like, well, how can it be that much of a disconnect that the horror audience saying that these movies are bad, but actual horror filmmakers are saying these movies are great? You know what I mean? I'm like, how is that a disconnect? Are indie horror filmmakers, and not all of them, are some of them just completely out of tune of what the audience wants?
I don't think it's that. I think that a lot of indie horror filmmakers, one, I think there's a lot of big things with the screenwriting community that have never had, there's a lot of people that write screenplays that have never had a drama class. And so they don't understand the arcs that are reached throughout a screenplay or a regular theatrical play. So they don't hit the marks. Because you usually have your build-up, your climax, and then your let-down. Sometimes, like, since you mentioned Terrifier, like, specifically Terrifier 2 was roughly an hour too long. Normally you have a build-up, a little bit of backstory, maybe a little bit more build-up, your climax, then your wind down, then possibly your big event, and then your resolution. Whereas Terrifier 2 had build up, gore. Build up, gore. Gore, gore, gore. Oh, a new backstory. And it didn't follow any normal arc of a script.
But I also say about Terrifier 2 is they had that whole 30 minutes in of the clown TV show that had nothing to do with the whole entire fucking movie.
Yeah.
I thought that was on tie-in. It was literally 30 minutes with that TV show, the kids' TV show, that had nothing to do with the whole entire fucking movie. I thought that was going to wrap around some kind of way. And I was sitting there. I saw this movie in the theaters, and I was 2.5 hours long, and I'm sitting like, oh my god, like what is going on here? Like this is way too long. You could have definitely took an hour out of this movie, and it would have been perfect. It would have been great if you would knock the whole hour out of this movie.
I agree. And there's times when I think that filmmakers do something that is supposed to be unsettling, but it ends up being they take the joke too long, or it goes too many times in, and then it becomes a laughable point. Like, I'll go back to Long Legs with Nicolas Cage, and he randomly sings songs in the middle of the movie. And it sounds ridiculous. It's just not good. And so it becomes like, you're in the middle of this like kind of serial killer thing, and then all of a sudden, here's Nicolas Cage in a creepy sort of feminine voice trying to sing Happy Birthday, and you're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Why is this in here? What? And of course that takes you completely out of the situation. And while everybody knows that Nicolas Cage is going to be over the top in anything he does,
which I love Nicolas Cage.
Yes, I don't have a problem with Nicolas Cage as a person. He does put on some amazing performances. I still am very entertained by what he did in Vampire's Kiss years ago. But at a certain point, as a director, you have to know and be able to guide your editor as to, okay, we don't need this part in here. It doesn't move the story along. It provides an area for people to be brought out of the story. So why don't we cut this scene here? And to me, that's, something that would make logical sense, where I'm sure the indie filmmaker is more along the lines of, well, it's Nicolas Cage. We can't cut Nicolas Cage.
Yeah. Because I watched, listen, I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I'm doing a review of it. But, like, I watched this an indie horror movie. I'm doing a review of it. It'll be up next week. And the movie was perfect. Like, what I thought I was getting in the beginning was, like, perfect. I was, like, edge of my seat. And then the filmmaker tricked the audience to say, oh, you thought this was going to be this, but this is going to be this. And the way I can clarify this, I'm not a woman, but I can imagine this is what a good little woman said. It's like meeting the perfect guy. He's good looking. He's smart. He makes good money. He's everything you want in a man. And then he drops his pants and he has a 1/2 inch dick. But that's what that movie was like to me. I was like, wow, I thought it was something else. And then you just tricked me on purpose and gave me something that I'm like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what was the point of that?
I can't tell you. I've run into that myself with books and movies. And to me, it's just like, okay, the director thought that they're being clever or something.
Yes.
But to me, you're not doing yourself any favors by pissing off your audience.
Yes.
For me, like an amazing indie horror movie is May. I don't know if you've ever seen May. Has Angela Bettis in it. Wonderful film. It's about a young lady who was brought up in kind of like an odd situation, and she has trouble making friends and stuff, so she decides to make her own friend. And I'll just leave it there. It's a wonderful independent horror film. Definitely watch it.
Most definitely. All right, Danielle, where can everyone find you and your work?
Well, you can go to my website at danielledevore.com, or you can find my books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the major retailers.
Danielle, this was fun.
Absolutely.
And listen, everybody, get up to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you find your books, or on her website, which is danielledevore.com. And please grab your copy of Sorrow's Point. And you got the next edition coming out in May of 2025, right?
It's book 5 is coming out in May of 2025, but prior to that, we are doing a complete revamping of the entire series with new covers and everything. So that's coming soon.
Love it. Listen, Danielle, once again, it's been a pleasure. Listen, come back on anytime. I
would love to come back. I'm always ecstatic to talk about horror books and horror movies, and I will ramble until the cows come home.
Me too. Well, everyone, thank you for coming to the Horror Round. I am Travis Bruce, and that is Danielle Devore.
Yes.
We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.